Sportsline Podcast here on CHCH. I'm Bubba O'Neill. No doubt, folks, just like yourself, are seeking sports content, especially when it pertains to the behind-the-scenes stories for athletes, teams, broadcasters, and executives. On this day, an announcer and author out of tiny Courtice, Ontario, who's made a large impact in the sports radio industry. February 1st, 1980, this graduate of Ryerson University begins his career as a sports writer at the Etobicoke Gazette newspaper. Some 44 years and nearly 300 major sports events, including the recently played World Series. Roger Lajoie has entertained, investigated, and informed us on the legendary Fan 590 Sports Network. But as you see, there's so much more that's built and maintained this lengthy and outstanding career. Once said by Mark Twain, the secret of success is making your vocation your vacation. Let's bring in the man. It is so awesome to talk to you, Roger. It's been a long time coming. Thanks for joining us on the Sportsline Podcast.
Bubba, it's my pleasure to chat with you. Thank you for that very lovely introduction. I much appreciate it. It's been a long journey. It's been a lot of fun. And you got the tagline right. That's the one I use all the time. Vocation is a vacation. I know everybody is excited to be going to see Taylor Swift. If you have tickets, that's the way I feel when I go to work most of the day. So I'm a pretty lucky guy, and it's great to be with you, sir.
Well, let's talk about that, Raj. I mean, it is this career that both you and I have, enjoyed in sports media, whether it be television, radio. You've also been an executive with the Ottawa Senators franchise. Where did this all start? Where did you say, look, I want to be involved sometime or some way in sports?
Started, Bubba, as my memory would have to go back to being 7 years old at home and watching sports. My dad was a big sports fan, and I still remember, my father's passed away now, but I used to have a little chalkboard, and I would write stories of the game on the chalkboard while I was watching games as young as age 7. And I even knew the tagline, the city line, to put, Philadelphia with the dash afterwards. That's how in tune I was as sports as a kid. And then, so I followed the path. I took the traditional path. I started at Ryerson University. I actually started in high school. I did a lot of writing for the school paper in high school. Then I graduated high school, went to Dawson College in Quebec, a CEGEP, for 2 years, was editor of the student paper there, and made my way to Ryerson University. I was very fortunate at that time, Ryerson Polytechnical Institute, to be able to get into that program. Took a journalism degree, and as you alluded in your introduction, on February 1st, 1980, I got my first job, started my first job at the Etobicoke Gazette newspaper as a part-time sports writer while in my third year at Ryerson, and that's where the journey began. And what you outlined is kind of an indication of the fun things I've gotten to do, and it's hard to believe, but February 1st, 2025 will mark 45 years since starting my career as a third-year journalism student, still in school at Ryerson. So it's been a long journey, but yeah, it's been fun.
It's amazing for me to think that a lot of this, and a lot of us bounce around and do different things to get into what we eventually want to do. And you start out more as a writer. But where does the announce part come full circle for you?
Well, back in the day, Bubba, when we started, and people of my era started, we had an expression going, if you were going to make any money or have a long career, you better work both sides of the street, it was called. And the reason it was called both sides of the street, in most small towns in Ontario and Canada, for that matter, there'd be a radio station and a newspaper in town, and then a lot of times they would be across the street from each other. So therefore, it was a natural thing, if you were writing for a newspaper, as I started my career, that you'd also find a way to do some extra work at the radio station. And as things evolved, obviously that went to TV. That also went to now digital and internet. So it was not unusual. It seems unusual now to say, man, you've done so many different things. But a lot of it was a desire to make the career as financially viable as possible and to take advantage of the opportunities that were there. So it was really just a natural thing. And now you see it. You talk about people who have been tremendously successful. I'll see if I can pull up a name at the top of my head. Someone like, say, Damian Cox. Is Damian Cox a newspaper reporter, a TV guy, a digital guy? What was he exactly? Well, he was all of the above. And I think a lot of people are in the same thing. Stephen Brunt, same kind of thing. You know, great newspaper guys, gravitated to TV, gravitated to radio, and did a lot of things. I'm not in their ilk. I'm not comparing myself to those guys. They're media legends in this country, but on a smaller scale, that's exactly what I did. And it was by necessity, primarily. And secondly, when you love what you're doing, you're looking for as many different ways to do it. And if you're only going to work for a newspaper or a wire service or a TV station or a radio station, you're shutting yourself out of other opportunities. So I was very lucky to be able to, I guess I can call it, worm my way into, while I was at Oshawa, when one of my first newspaper jobs, I worked at the radio station as well. And I was the play-by-play and color guy for Oshawa Generals Hockey for a lot of years. So that's where it started, and that led to the Fan, and everything leads to everything. So that's basically the story as to why my career was had as much variety as it did. It was out of necessity, and it was out of a desire to do as much as I could. And put two together, there you go.
It's amazing to think, you know, because I think of you getting into the Fan. Now, was it CJCL at the time? Was it even the Fan at the time when you got in there? Because that ends up being the premier sports radio station with the best people, including yourself. Please don't take yourself out of that equation. You're part of that mix where it's a dominant radio station. The best guests are coming on. You're highlighting live sports as well as sports chat when I think it was at its peak. What was it like being at the Fan? You know, and obviously you're still there. What was it like during those days?
Oh, those were fun days, Bubba. And you're absolutely right about the Fan and its impact on the Canadian sports talk scene. It still is the largest sports radio station in the country. But, you know, in its infancy, we had just started. at the Fan, and my great buddy who's in this photo that's up there, Storm and Norman Rumek, and by the way, that's George Strombolopoulos, a very young George Strombolopoulos next to him, myself, and Steve Audio, one of our producers. And, you know, the station, when it first started, was the old CJCL, and in September of 1992, they created the first all-sports station called the Fan 1430. Norm had a job as the late-night vampire. People remember him. You talk about fan legends. He's one of them right at the top. And he did the late-night show. And Norm and I had been friends for a decade prior to that. And in one of my previous jobs in my career, I was the business manager of the Toronto Marlboros, and Norm actually helped out as a volunteer for the Marlboros. So we became very good friends as he was starting his career. And so he got the gig, and he said, you know, I'm always looking for guests. And at that time, I was working for the Oshawa This Week newspaper, and I was also freelancing for United Press International, and I was covering the Blue Jays, the Leafs, and major sports events that you alluded to again in the intro. So I was a pretty good guest, you know, to have for the station. So September, October, and into November, Norm's using me a heck of a lot because, you know, scrambling, you're trying to find people, and I was his pal. So he could call me anytime, day or night, and I love Norm, and I love the station. So I thought, sure, I'm going to do it. So one thing leads to another, and the program director at that time, Alan Davis, had heard me on with Norm a lot, and mentioned to Norm and later to me when I was introduced to him that, hey, this guy knows his stuff. We're always looking for hosts. Maybe he would be interested. And at that time, I had a full-time job at the newspaper in Oshawa, and I had the part-time job at United Press International. So I did not want a full-time radio gig like Norm did, but I reached out to him. I said, sure. I went down and had a chat with him. I said, as a fill-in guy, as a guy who is available when you need him, if you can work around my schedule, I work around yours. I would love to do it. And the interview went, Bubba, and I didn't hear from him for about, 2-3 weeks. And near the end of November, just called me out of the blue and said, hey, can you host Saturday? I think it was in one of those long shifts we used to do. Oh, my goodness, we used to do long shows. I think it was like noon to 6, something like that. Yeah. And I said, yeah, well, sure. Like, I'd love the opportunity. He said, that's great. I'll put you on the schedule. And I said, okay. What am I going to talk about? And he goes, well, I'll just play the hits, right? Leafs, this is how old it was. The Raptors hadn't been born yet, for heaven's sakes, at this time. But, do the standard sports, whatever, talk. So anyway, a lot of winging it. You work with a young producer. And that role that I started at and that is 32 years, Bubba. November the 30th, I will be at the Fan. 32 years. So the Fan is 32 years, 2 months old. I've been there 32 years as a sports talk show host in exactly the same role, filling in when you need me, days, nights, weekends. I have worked every available hour of the day, including overnights on that station. I love the station with a passion. And back in the day, Bubba, it was just a different world before the internet, before everything else. You could do a 6-hour show and just throw the phone lines open, and you'd have content from people. And we were such a power as being the only sports radio station. You know, anybody we wanted as a guest would come on. And so that's where it started. And, man, I think back on that, and, I'm a notorious counter, Bubba. I count everything I do. I don't count anybody else's shows. I don't count anybody else's work. I count my own. And I've done 4,094 shows now on the Fan, heading into year 32. And a lot of those shows back in the day were 6-7 hour bangers. So they weren't this, no half hour kind of thing. So it's been a long thing, but I love the Fan. And I'm so grateful that even after all these years, I'm still relevant enough, and I am, to continue doing shows at this time. But yes, back in the day, the Fan was a force, boy.
Tremendous knowledge, experience, and that's why you're still relevant today. And I think that in my listening to you over the years, that you have an ability to talk about a variety of different sports. Your knowledge is that deep, and I think that's why you're so well respected and easily why they keep bringing you back. So, you talk about it. It was a different world when you and I first got into this business, and like you said, in some cases, no internet, and you're working the phones, and everything was just so different back in the day. Now here we are right now, and you've had the experience, and you've had the ability to teach as well too, and share your knowledge and spread the seed, as they kind of say. When you look at the future of the business right now, what are you seeing?
Yeah, that's a great question. You referred to my teaching background as well, Bubba. I spent 10 years as a teacher, basically, from 2008 to 2018. Actually, it was probably 12 years, but I taught for a total of 10 years at the College of Sports Media, private sports broadcasting school in Toronto, which is an excellent school. And I returned to my alma mater and taught at Ryerson University in the sport media program for 4 years. So I had an opportunity to work with younger people, and it's great. Bubba, as a teacher, and now I consider myself a mentor. I do some life coaching as well with my teammates, partners, and we're very involved with mentoring and teaching younger people, and a lot of them are broadcasters looking to find their way. The biggest difference, Bubba, in the industry, obviously, is the platforms and the challenge of now making money in the industry. It's always been difficult to get a job in the industry, and it's even tougher as time goes on. But now the difference is when I first started, I said, I got to get someone to hire me. I got to get a newspaper to hire me so I can get some clippings. I got to get a radio station to hire me so I can get some reps and build my career. That was the challenge. That's still the challenge, but now you can start your career instantaneously. And we all know, set up a podcast, do a blog, put up your own website. So now the challenge of getting the reps, the opportunity to start in the business, is actually quite easy. Anybody can do it. Now the problem is, how do you cut through the clutter? And how do you become viable? And a lot of my former students always come to me and say, well, yeah, I got a podcast going, and it's on all the major platforms. And my answer is, congratulations. Everybody's podcast is on all the major platforms, too. There's 8 billion of them. I don't even know where to turn or look. I don't diminish it. I'm not criticizing it. It's just different. So now you have that opportunity, but now you've got to be an entrepreneur. Now you got to be a businessman. Now you got to sell sponsorships. Now you got to know social media outreach, and not just social media outreach, but how to make money off of that. So that's the real challenge. Traditional media has a enormous challenge it's facing. Everybody knows it. It's shrinking. It's difficult. But if somebody young to me says, hey, I want to be a sports broadcaster or a news broadcaster, or I want to be in the media business, there's still opportunity there. But it's extremely different. And the pathway I took is no longer available. It just isn't. You just aren't going to get a job at a weekly newspaper that can pay at least a living wage anymore. Those jobs are gone, and the ones that are there, people are barely hanging on. Same thing with radio. So back to how I started my career, that doing a variety of things is now a necessity for all of them. And if they're not prepared to do that, boy, the chances of success are pretty slim. So I guess, Bubba, is traditional media is going away, and now it's all about anybody can provide this. So your challenge is, why should they listen to you? And I always look at it, even to today, Bubba, when I start a fan show, I will never bring the guest in right off the bat. I take 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the show, even when I'm solo, and I'm solo a lot of times on the fan, to just talk. And people say, why do you take that approach? I tell you who my guests are going to be, so you'll listen to the fan. That first 5 to 10 minutes, I'm telling you why you should be listening to me. And I'm not saying that in a condescending way or an arrogant way. I'm just introducing myself, the show, what I'm expecting, talking about issues or whatever. So the challenge they're going to face is on their own products now, find a way to do that. So it's not better or worse, Bubba. It's very different. It's very different. And we'll see, as was the case back in the day, the ultra successful and good people will find their way. They will. And a lot of them won't.
I certainly agree with you.
That's the case in the media.
I certainly agree with you there too, and you're right. Being the guy or the girl right now that's legit, right? That you can trust. That's giving relative information, correct information, not always trying to be the first. That's the big dilemma I'm seeing right now. And if I can interject, because a point I really want to make about that is, here's another difference. When we first started in the media, nobody got to be a columnist or an opinion giver, unless they had enormous experience in the business. Journalism, sports coverage, and news coverage in particular was bare bones, facts, present the information, and when you get to a certain level, then the opinion comes in. Now, it's all opinion. It's all opinion. What's your opinion? Nobody is really, and you say, an expert. How do you get to be an expert? How do you get to be someone who understands sports? Well, in my case, I went into dressing rooms. I covered events. I worked as a writer. I covered games. I got to know the personalities involved. It's a tough road, but you work your way through it. Now, some people just come on and immediately just start giving their opinions. And I listen to them, and even the ones that are really good, and I'm thinking, well, what do you know? Like, it's true.
Why is your opinion so much? Why should I be listening to you? Back to why I introduce myself on my shows on the fan the way I do. This is why you should be listening to me. I give my spin. I talk about it. I mention things, whatever the story may be. So, now it used to be all facts, and you used to have to get a job. Now you don't have to get a job, and it's all opinion. And you better have one, because that's all anybody really is interested in these days is opinion. And that's a loss for people who just enjoy some analysis instead of opinion. Uneducated opinions are a dime a dozen, Bubba. Good, factual information that somebody can make their own opinion about is really lacking, and not in sports so much, but especially in news these days. And I'm not going any further down that road.
Yeah, the old hot take, right? Like that's what's out there. But yeah, you're right. You do certainly have to weed through that. You've been in the Toronto sports scene for so long, and you've been able to see the highest of the highs with World Series and I can't say a Stanley Cup, but you've seen so much in your time broadcasting. I want to get your opinions, your hot takes on a couple of things here when it comes to sports. Look, this week is the Grey Cup. The Toronto Argonauts are in the game playing the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It's a tremendous story if you're a CFL fan. I say if you're a CFL fan. Can you explain to me, and I'm going to put up a board here that shows the success of the Argonauts over the years, which has been outstanding. In the last 12 years, I believe they've won three Grey Cups. They're in a situation where they can win 4. Can you explain to me, the fan is certainly not huge into the CFL, and I don't think Toronto is. Hamilton is. What's the issue here?
Well, that's a great question. First I talked about, let me explain maybe, let's go back 32 years when the fan was first on in 1992. Bubba, your introduction, your talk about, what's wrong with people's CFL, that would have been a topic on that night. 32 years ago. That's how long this story has been around, is why people don't follow the CFL compared to other sports. But here's what's transpired since that opening in 1992. The arrival of the Toronto Raptors, the proliferation of international sports, the more extra sporting options that are available, both on men's and women's sports, and all of the options. I said cutting through the clutter. That's what the Argos have to do, is cut through the clutter, and they didn't do a very good job of it. Now, there are a lot of reasons. A lot of them were self-imposed for a large period of time. Not so much anymore. I think the Argos do a pretty good job right now, actually. They get criticized a lot, but I think the Argos try hard, and I think Mike Hogan does a fantastic job promoting the Argos in the CFL. It's just largely, unfortunately, on deaf ears. The younger demographic is just not into it. They just didn't adapt. Why are we all in love with sports, Bubba? Because I mentioned, my dad, was a factor for me, because he loves sports. What he's watching, I'm watching. And then you get a whole generation of fans in Toronto that went away from the CFL because of blackouts, because of a variety of things, whatever, increased competition. They watched the NFL. They became big NFL fans. The NBA became bigger. The National Hockey League is always there. The Leaf juggernaut is always there. And the Argos kind of maintain their same audience. Well, one thing I've always told my students is that, you're never tell anybody when you say, how's it going? The same. It's never the same. It's either better or worse. You are never the same. If you are the same, you're getting worse. You've got to evolve. You've got to get better. So don't say you're the same. You're actually worse. That's the way I look at the CFL. It's the same demographic. It's the same crowd. They still like them. There's a small percentage of people who really enjoy it, but they have not captured the marketplace. And as a sports radio talk show host, Bubba, and especially the kind of shows I do, which are Sportsnet Tonight, general magazine type shows, if I can use that, talking about a variety of sports, I got to play the hits. Alan Davis told me that when I started the station 32 years. Raj, play the hits. Play the big hits. What are the big hits? Leafs, Jays, NFL, the Raptors, the bigger ones, and the CFL doesn't make that list. I wish it did. I love the CFL. And Bubba, I think I'm still on the fan 32 years later, because I learned one thing really early in my career. It's not about you, it's about them. Right. It's not about what you want to talk about. It's what the audience wants to talk about. And I even explained that during my classes. I used fantasy sports and sports betting as an example. I said, the most boring thing in the world to a listener is your fantasy team. The most interesting thing in the world to the listener is their fantasy team. So don't go on air and say, geez, I started a running back and I'm in 7th place in my pool. Nobody cares.
No.
But go on the air and say, listen, this running back is going to start. He's been on the bench the last little while. I think this can help your team. Then they're all ears. Same thing with me. I love junior hockey. Nobody in the GTA, I should never say nobody, but very few people in the GTA, and as Brampton and Mississauga and Toronto, I lived that for 25 years, Bubba. Trust me, people don't care. I do. So what am I going to talk about on my shows? I'm going to talk about the Leafs, the Jays, and the NFL.
It's so true.
Because I know nobody is going to listen to me break down I don't even know what they're called anymore, the Brampton Steelheads, I guess now they're called, defense alignments, because Owen Sound's coming in. It's a big game tonight. I would love to do that, but my audience it's not about me, it's about them. So that's a tip for young broadcasters, is you remember that. You don't lead the boat. It's not. And then people say, well, if you talked about it, more people would go to the games. Well, I'm sorry, more people are going to have to go to the games before I talk about it. And by the way, I've talked, my CFL coverage on my shows on the Fan has increased quite a bit in the last couple of years because of the Argos record. And you're absolutely right. The Argos are 18-6 in Grey Cups, Bubba. They have not lost a Grey Cup game since 1997, I believe. Might even be, but they've won the last 7 times. They've been in the Grey Cup. and they were 16-2 last year and won the Cup in 2022 and are back in the Cup this year. But that does not change what people's at. Now, there's more interest. Attendance is up a bit. So I have a show Friday night. I will be talking about the Argos in the Grey Cup because now there's enough listenership for me to do that. But when the season starts again and when there's 11,000 people at BMO Field, maybe I can't talk about it, even if I wanted to. It's just not enough of a listenership. And then people turn the station on and they'll go, don't they know the Jays just made a trade? Why is he talking about the CFL? Like, doesn't he know, like, going to a sports bar on a Sunday and try to get a CFL game on, if there's a CFL game on us, or even on a Saturday when U.S. College, try to look around you, see what people are talking about. So I feel for them. I love the CFL, but Bubba, we don't have enough time to talk about all the reasons why they are not relevant in Toronto, but very unfortunately, they are not relevant in Toronto. I'm sad to say.
One team that never has to worry about being relevant is the Toronto Maple Leafs, who, played 3 snoozing periods against the Ottawa Senators, and I'm sure you love the Senators' victory. And then they played 2 snoozing periods against Washington and then got hot in the third and certainly won in overtime. Now, that's just 2 games I'm talking about. Looking at this difference at the head coaching position with Craig Berube, will he be the difference maker for the Toronto Maple Leafs this season?
Well, before I answer that question, I want to say this. I'm not as happy about the Ottawa Senators wins as I was when I was working for the Ottawa Senators organization. That was Mr. Melnick was the owner. So there's that. And by the way, some people who, when they first hear that, and maybe some people who heard first you say that, I pride myself. A lot of people will say, you worked for the Ottawa Senators? They don't even know. So that's why it's important if you're going to have a variety of things going on in your career. Yes, I worked for the Ottawa Senators organization for 20 years, and I was able to do a sports talk radio show in Toronto because I knew my audience. I knew what they wanted to talk about. They didn't want to talk about the Senators. They hate the Senators. They want to talk about the Leafs. I just wanted to get that out. Berube is a nice fit. I think he's an excellent coach. I thought the Leafs could have won last year. I think there's a little bit of stereotyping going on with the team, Bubba, because people continue to say, playoff style, they're not tough enough. Their goaltending isn't good enough. They don't play playoff style hockey. I beg to differ. Let's go back to last year's series against the Boston Bruins. That's a 7-game series. It ended 2-1 in overtime, as we all know. Leafs goaltending was, by the way, their number one goaltender got hurt in the series, but their goaltending was excellent. Their defense was very good. The games were all low scoring. They lost for the same reason they have lost in most of their playoff failures. Their top scorers didn't score. So to your question about Berube, he will get them playing that style of hockey more often. They will do it more often in the regular season. And come playoff time, they'll be better prepared. But I would suggest to you, the Maple Leafs were very prepared to play the Boston Bruins. They are not an easy team to play against anymore. They are more physical. They are tougher. Their goaltending is good. Their defense could be better. There's no question about it. But compared to teams that have won a couple of playoff rounds, sure, by now they should have won another series. Why not? Their big guns haven't scored. So, Bubba, if you're going to pay your top 4 guys that kind of money, and they're not going to score in deciding games, look at the scores. 3-1 against Montreal. 3-0 against Columbus. 2-1 Boston in overtime. Let's see if we can figure out why they didn't win those series in those deciding games. It wasn't any of the reasons people are talking about. Their big guns don't score. And by the way, in the one series they did win, who scored the goal? John Tavares.
Yep.
Wasn't Matthews. Wasn't Marner. It was Tavares. Wasn't Nylander. It was Tavares. None of those guys have ever produced in the crunch game. So to answer your question, I think Berube gives them a better chance. But if Berube's coaching and the big guns of the Maple Leafs continue not to score in crucial games, it doesn't matter who's coaching, they're not going to win. I don't think the problem is this, they're not good enough if they playoff style hockey, whatever. Ask the Boston Bruins how tough the Toronto Maple Leafs are to play against. They'll tell you private, and they won't say, they'll tell you, you know what, they're tough. That was tough, man. We got at the skin of our teeth 2-1. Oh, and by the way, Nylander and Matthews both missed 3 games in that series, and the Leafs goalies got hurt, and it still went 7 games in overtime. And I still get people telling me how much better Boston is in Toronto. I don't know. I guess I didn't watch the same series. Bubba. So will they finally break through? I don't know. I think they're in better position. I thought they were going to win last year, Bubba, so I'm the wrong guy to ask if you think the Leafs are going to win this year. But Berube's a great fit. He's a great coach. He's won a Stanley Cup. They got as good a chance now as they've ever had in the last 8 years.
You've had a long history with the Toronto Blue Jays as an official Major League Baseball scorer. This is kind of a two-part question here. We're going to start with this here. I think there are people out there going, what is a scorer? Can you please tell them? This is one of the amazing other things that you've done in your career.
Yeah, it is. I love it. It's 13 years I've been with the Blue Jays. All right, ground ball to first, bobbled by the first baseman. First baseman throws the ball over. Pitcher runs over to cover. It goes off his glove. It's a close play at first base. Is it a hit or an error? The official scorer makes that decision. And what makes the job so unique and so interesting, Bubba? One guy. One guy makes that decision. One guy makes that call. Now, there are ways to appeal the decision. There's online supervisors. Sometimes calls are changed. But the instant that happens, the official scorer must say within, I'm asked this a lot, but I'll guess 10 to 15 seconds with maybe one look at a replay, hit or an error. That's what the official scorer does. So it's a very unique position. But then people say, how did you get to be the official scorer of the Toronto Blue Jays? I was the official scorer of the Toronto Maple Leaf Baseball Club in the Inter-County Baseball League, Bubba. Are you ready? 35 years. I was 35 years in the minors. And then finally somebody said, yeah, maybe that guy could, there was an opening. And then people go, oh, you're lucky. How did you get that job as official scorer? Go to the Inter-County, be a scorer for 35 years, and you might get a chance to be the official scorer too. So, but that's what the official scorer is. And I've done it for 13 years. And I want to really emphasize here again, back to, I worked for the Senators organization for 20 years. I'm on the fan. I do not work for the Blue Jays. I work for Major League Baseball. I am hired by Major League Baseball, and I must be totally impartial. Right. So there is no homerism. There is no, I do not associate with the Blue Jays. And, you said it in a way, you're with the Blue Jays. Well, I'm with the Blue Jays because I'm the Blue Jays official scorer. Right. But I am an employee of Major League Baseball, and that's why I can do that and have other gigs as well.
So let's go to the Blue Jays, because I know you talk about them a lot on air, and certainly this off season is going to be, I think it's going to be as big as the one we just had, which we had a lot of talk about a guy by the name of Shohei Ohtani. And then all of a sudden this week, the front cover of the New York Post produces this. Juan Soto, what is going to happen? Are we going to go through all of this all over again? John Heyman's a pretty good MLB insider. But, boy, this really opened up some wounds, I think, from last year, I think, for a lot of Blue Jay fans. Is this just hype?
That's another great question. Well, here, let me say about that headline in particular and all of them. And this is, I guess, an explanation, though, sometimes how it's frustrating to work in this market, Bubba. People say, yeah, the Blue Jays, create this hype. New York Post is putting this up here. The American media is putting this. It's not even local media that's saying, yet somehow people blamed the Blue Jays front office and blamed the Toronto media, and in a lot of cases blamed the fan for creating this hysteria about Ohtani and now Soto. Pardon me. We're just now I'm going to react because you asked me about a story in the New York Post. So is there some truth to it? Look, if I'm a free agent, I'm going to go and leak rumors and make sure that people know I'm talking to a lot of teams. I don't doubt for a second the Blue Jays were interested in Ohtani. In fact, I know they were because they flew him to their spring training base and they showed him around the facilities. And so it was not a complete. However, he winds up signing with the Dodgers. So I don't know what will happen with Soto, but I'll say this: the Blue Jays better have a better off season than they did last year. Because, okay, you know what? If you miss out on Ohtani, that's fine. If you miss out on Soto, that's fine. But if you miss out on, what are you going to do? And last year, they didn't do very much. And I know there weren't very, comparably speaking, as many good free agents. But this year, Bubba, there's a lot of good free agents out there, man. O'Neill, Alonso, Santander. There's lots of ways the Blue Jays can add a couple of big bats. And before they even chase Soto, and here's the thing. So if they sign Soto, are they going to re-sign Vladdy? And if they're not going to re-sign Vladdy and sign Soto, well, I wouldn't even like the signing of Soto as much as I would if they were going to do both. So I'd like to see the overall picture. Now, that said, they were, I believe, 7th in Major League Baseball in payroll, which is really good, especially when you consider you take in Canadian dollars and your money is in U.S. dollars, and they're competing against 30 other teams that don't have that disadvantage. So I give them credit. They'll spend money. They brought in, Bassett and Gosman and Hyun-Jin Ryu, and they spent money. George Springer. They've spent money in the past. So if they do it, yes, but I'm wait and see, like a lot of fans, in terms of what they do. I don't think it'll be Soto. I think Soto signs with the 2 New York teams, but I don't know. Maybe it would float his boat to be, the King of Canada. I don't know, maybe. But if he doesn't sign, it won't be because the Blue Jays cheaped out or the Blue Jays didn't do it. I sincerely believe they are in their pitching. I don't think there's any question about that, but I wouldn't count on Soto. But my answer is, if it's no Soto, then who? And by the way, you got a guy you got to re-sign. Never mind chasing the free agents now. Vladdy has to be re-signed. If you're just letting him go for nothing and bringing in another bat, Soto's going to have the same experience as Vladdy did, hitting in a lineup around a bunch of kids. So we'll see.
What about Bichette?
Do something about it.
What about Bichette?
I would re-sign Bichette too.
Yeah.
I haven't given up on Bo Bichette. Look at his career. You could make an argument the first 6 years of the Bo Vladdy era that Bo has been just as good as Vladdy. Not last year, because Bo was terrible, really terrible last year. But largely injury related. But approximately the same age, approximately the same stats, a more key position at shortstop really than first base DH in terms of how defensively it goes. I would certainly do it. And I love Bubba, this is how fans and some media think too. It makes me laugh. They say, oh, yeah, no, don't sign Bichette. No, don't sign him. No, trade him to the Dodgers because you'll get all kinds of good stuff for him. Well, if you're going to get all kinds of good stuff for him, why don't you just keep the guy?
I agree.
Like, first you think he stinks and you don't want to give him the money, and on the other side of your mouth, you say trade him to the Dodgers because you'll get all kinds of good. Well, the Dodgers are watching the same games you are. So I think there's a lot of recency bias with Bichette. He could play on my team anytime, and I think my team, when he's healthy, is going to beat your team most of the time with him on. I would re-sign them both. I'd add another bat or two and maybe another pitcher, and that's asking a lot. But if you do that, I don't know. I think that team can still compete. I think there's a lot of good pieces there. That front line, top 3 starters, even though they're getting a little bit older, they're really good. They're really good. So I'm optimistic. We'll see, but I don't want to hear play-by-play of Soto. I just call me when you sign. But that's coming from the New York Post, okay?
Yeah.
I don't want people commenting on our show. You guys are driving this Soto hysteria. You put up. Is that the headline of the Toronto Sun? Is that the headline of the Toronto Star? No. Is it on the Fan? No. It came from Heyman in New York, and now we got to react. I don't think he does, but boy, Soto, Guerrero Jr., and Bichette, back to back to back.
Juicy. Juicy.
Sounds pretty good.
I wanted to end on the Raptors here, but I think we both can agree that, they're probably going to win 22 games. They've admitted that they're rebuilding, so I'm going to bypass the Raptors for this. I'm going to drop this bomb on you.
Oh.
27-year-old Jake Problem Child Paul versus 58-year-old Iron Mike Tyson on Netflix Friday night. Is this a sideshow? Will you be watching? Will the world be watching?
I'll probably watch because I'm on the Fan 7 to 10 Friday. I don't think that fight is going to go off until well past 10 o'clock if it's like most pay-per-view things. I will watch out of professional curiosity. Well, of course, it's a sideshow. It's a 58-year-old guy going into the ring against a 27-year-old YouTuber. How does anybody even if you're supporting it and think it's great and I'll be watching, Bubba, there is no argument. Of course it's a sideshow. Of course it's just a joke. A joke and maybe not being the right word. Tyson trying, I get it. But in terms of an entertainment thing, of course it's it's a gimmick. When's the last time Tyson fought? 20 years ago? And he wasn't very good 20 years ago, and now he's 58, and he's going to fight. I just hope, I almost hope the thing's a little phony because I don't want to see anybody badly hurt here. And, the irony of that event, Bubba, is kind of funny to me, is Tyson has one of the great lines of sports. Everybody quotes it all the time. And it's about life. Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. That's what he said years ago. Yep. That's his quote. Well, I tell you what. He gets punched in the face by a 27-year-old guy, and Paul is what he is as a boxer. End of the day, that's been a bit of a sideshow too, but he's a young guy, and clearly he's had some success in the ring. We've seen him. I've seen a couple of the fights, but I'll watch out of curiosity. He gets suckered in like a lot of other people, but that is not. And by the way, Friday night, we will certainly talk about that at some point in the 3-hour show because people are talking about it. People are the same reason I'm talking about the Argos this weekend because they're in the Grey Cup. Normally, I wouldn't be talking about most boxing fights because they don't have that kind of cachet, but this one does. But strictly, I look at this as an entertainment thing. I just hope nobody gets hurt in this. And my goodness, 58-year-old guy going into the ring. I don't know about this, but as an older guy, I'm going to cheer for Tyson. That's for sure.
Well, because we remember Tyson when he was at his peak, when he wasn't 58 years old, when he was the youngest heavyweight champion of all time, before some of the other issues and problems. And it was fun. I mean, putting aside the Muhammad Ali era, where basically covered 3 decades, this was Tyson at his peak was must-see television, must-see pay-per-view television.
He was the baddest man on the planet, so self-called, and he was. And you're right. Tyson, back in the day, was the equivalent of Tiger Woods. Yeah. He was dominant. He was undefeated. People were scared to death of him. Most of his heavyweight title fights went a round or 2. He was fearsome. It was out of control. And then, of course, it fell apart and a lot of things came in life. And that's the way it's been with Tyson. But no, there's no question about that. That's why it's such a successful thing. And I think this one is probably going to have the highest of all of Paul's fights because this is just, it's a generational battle. It's Tyson. Funny thing is, if you had said after Tyson, with the famous, ear biting incident and all the end of his career and then all the problems and the legal problems and everything that transpired with him, if you had said then, Bubba, that in 2024, would be a 58-year-old guy that everybody's feeling sorry for and cheering for. Yeah, come on, champ. I think things started to turn around with him after he got in The Hangover. That got everybody liking Tyson again. He was funny in The Hangover, so it is what it is. It's a spectacle, but that's a sideshow. Thing about that is, the day after, no one will ever talk about it again. That's one of those. That's it. We're talking about now. There'll be a lead in. People will watch once it's over. Whatever.
It's crazy to think, Raj, and again, just not to date both of us, but the ear biting incident with Holyfield, I believe that was like 1996.
It was in the 90s. Yeah.
And like you said, he's going into the ring, in a couple of days. Raj, this has been amazing. It's been so long overdue. Great to hang out with you, talk sports, talk about the industry, continue success. You are a wonderful example of someone that just understands the grind and is able to adjust to the different periods of the business. And we use the word relevant, and you're extremely relevant today. And I think we both know how hard that is to do, but it's all because of hard work and attitude. And as we say, attitude is everything. So congratulations on all that you've done. Congratulations on what you're going to do ahead of time. And I'm so proud that you joined us here on the Sportsline Podcast.
Bubba, that is so kind of you. I appreciate it so much. I appreciate you. And, ditto for your career. I'm glad to see you doing a podcast. In addition to, you've had a very interesting and terrific career of your own. And you understand it because you've also lived it a lot. So that means a lot coming from you. It's always nice to receive a compliment. People enjoy your work and say things like you did. And I much, much do appreciate it. But coming from someone like yourself, I think is and there you are. If you had said even 10 years ago, part of my thing on Sportsline is I'm going to be doing a podcast, and we're going to put this up on our digital channels and everything, we would have said, well, you're staying relevant. This is what's needed. That the extra. Why don't you just do TV? Why don't you just write a blog? It's like, no, you do everything. So everything you just said about me applies to you as well. And I'm not just saying that to flatter you, because you've interviewed me, but that's indeed the case. And your career is one to be very proud of. And it's interesting, I don't do a lot of podcasts, but when I do, because it's people I like, so that's why I immediately said yes to you. But I did one with a guy a lot of people are familiar with, named Toronto Mike, and he doesn't just do sports; he does a wide variety of them. Yep. But I'm going to say the same thing to you that I did as we wrap this up. Is I told Toronto Mike at some point, and he counts his shows too. I think he's done like 1,500, 1,600. So he's really carving out a nice niche for himself as well. But I told him at some point somebody's got to interview you the way you interview other people, because you've become, you're a part of the story too. And he said, yeah, maybe sometime down the road. I said, I am volunteering to do that. So Bubba, I make the same pledge to you. If you ever decide after you've done 1,500 of these podcasts, you know what? I think maybe it's time somebody interviewed me. My hand is up. I volunteer to do that, because I know firsthand what a career you've had too. So I appreciate you. I'm grateful for your comments, and I thank everybody for listening. And I guess for any of the kids out there, I always try to leave with a message: is if there's something you really, really, really want, then go out and chase it down like you're running after the last bus of the night. And doesn't matter if 90% of the world doesn't have it, you'll be one of the top 3. Don't let anybody discourage you. And if it doesn't, then you're a better person for making the chase. So hang in there, and you hang in there, Bubba, and it's a pleasure, and I'm honored to be on your show. Thank you.
Love the optimism, brother. Thank you so much again.
All the best. Thank you.
Well, folks, that's the Sportsline Podcast for the day. And as you've just seen and heard, we love talking to folks who are getting it done in the sports media world. If you do know of an athlete, team, or book to promote, we want to hear from you. Hit the 5-star and the subscribe button. And if you do have something to say, please comment, because we love hearing your opinions, your hot takes. Also, please check out the other informative podcasts CHCH have to offer. The talented, extraordinary people that make the Sportsline Podcast possible. Thank you so very much, and we'll see you soon.